SECFans.com. Week 7 is here. Week 6 was a good one. Had some crazy games that we've already talked about in the review. So we're going to get into the good stuff coming up, preview show right here. First, I want to thank all the viewers, all the podcasters, everybody that's been participating in the comments and the feedback. It's been really, really great. Got Husky Pup in the house again every week, week in and week out. We're going to get nerdy for you here in a second, but first I want to give you the rundown of what we got to talk about. First, we got our game of the week, Alabama and Tennessee. I think there's a lot to talk about there. Tennessee coming off a heartbreaker against A&M, and Alabama obviously with their win over Arkansas. We're going to get into a little bit with Ole Miss and Arkansas, some interesting storylines there, especially with those two offenses. And then a little bit on Florida and Missouri. We don't have a touch point from Florida that we thought we'd have from LSU last week. And Missouri's a little bit of an enigma this year. So we're going to talk about it and see what we can get there. But first off, Husky, Alabama, Tennessee, traditionally known by everyone as the third Saturday in October. A lot of history with this game, and this year maybe more interest than some years in the past because Alabama's doing their Alabama thing, but Tennessee is very much still in not just the SEC hunt, but the national title race because that loss to Texas A&M does not knock them out of it. And we preach it here. Everybody preaches it, really. An SEC team, unless they've got 7 losses, if they win the SEC, they're in the playoffs. So what are we looking at? Alabama, Tennessee, big game this weekend. Let's roll with it.
The Alabama-Tennessee game is important for a lot of reasons. First off, it's important for Tennessee because, this 9-year streak they're looking at, they want to break the streak. It's important for Alabama because Alabama really wants to run the table to ensure a slot in the SEC championship / national title. It's also important in the greater discussion for who's going to make the SEC championship because if Tennessee loses this game, all of a sudden the door is wide open for Florida to make it in. And, I feel like to start this, it seems unrelated, but it's not. That LSU-Florida thing really, really made this game a lot more important than it was going to be because, or could have been, because when Florida chose to, out of the compassion of their hearts to the people in Florida not to play this game likely ever, they did that because the way the SEC rules work, it's not wins that determine conference division champion. It's not losses. It's winning percentage. So if you win 6 games and another team wins 6 games, but you played fewer games, 6 wins out of 7 is a greater percentage than 6 wins out of 8. And so if Florida played LSU and lost, that loss basically puts them, with 2 losses, they need Tennessee to lose 3 because Tennessee has the head-to-head. But when Florida didn't play LSU, if they can run the rest of the table, they're going to end up 6-1 in the conference. And if Tennessee loses to Alabama and runs the table, they'll end up 6-2 in the conference. Which means even though they have the same number of wins as Florida, even though they beat Florida head-to-head, Florida has the higher winning percentage and gets to go to the SEC East Championship game. So because that game hasn't been played, I don't personally think it will be played for the reason I just outlined, and Florida is very aware of this fact. This game's a lot more importance because if Tennessee loses to Alabama, with Florida having not played LSU and potentially never playing LSU, it's entirely possible for Tennessee to have the same number of wins as the Florida team they beat and get knocked out of the SEC title game.
So, but I'll ask you this, though. For Alabama, if they're going to lose a game in the SEC this year, this is probably the one they want to lose.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, obviously, normally when you lose to a divisional opponent, it doesn't mean a whole lot because if Alabama loses to Tennessee and runs the table the rest of the way, Alabama will 100% go to the SEC championship game. And, there is some weirdness there because you could end up with something like a 3-way tie with Ole Miss, but you end up with it with the divisional. The point there being with an Ole Miss thing, right? Is if some other team in the SEC West And well, it would be Texas A&M, right? That if they were to beat lose to Alabama, beat Ole Miss, it's not going to happen, right? There's no scenario that plays out. So Alabama, if they run the table outside of Tennessee, is going to end up in the West Championship game. So yeah, I mean it's important. It's important on a lot of levels. It's important personally for these players. But yeah, that Florida thing, not playing LSU, it puts a lot of stress because other than that LSU game, Florida's got to play Missouri, Georgia, Arkansas, South Carolina. Those are all very winnable games. It's a lot of pressure on Tennessee to win this ball game.
So, getting into the numbers on this one, we just saw Alabama and Tennessee both had defensive performances that they probably don't want to write home about. I think a little bit of it might be exaggerated in both games just because of the nature of those games for different reasons. One, for Alabama, I think it was a teaching moment for Nick Saban. And for Tennessee, I think it was more of an epic game sort of situation, and their defense is probably better than the numbers they gave up. But before we get into the offenses, let's talk a little bit about the matchups on the defensive side. And even if you want to get into your model, you can. But I'm interested in what you think in terms of the Alabama defense in terms of matchups versus the UT offense, and then vice versa, especially within the context of what we know now in terms of Tennessee injuries. I think they had one announced today in Reese Maben that he's out for the season. So just some thoughts there on both of those.
Okay, I think the first thing to note is I'm just going to run down the Tennessee injury list, and this is everybody that I'm currently aware of that's injured. Linebacker Reeves Maben, linebacker Kirkland, linebacker McDowell, corner Sutton, defensive tackle O'Brien, defensive tackle Victors, running back Hurd, center Wiseman, guard Robertson. That's 9 players. 9. 8 of them are starters, listed starters. Now, maybe not all are gone, but that's over a third of the starting roster for Tennessee's team is currently injured and may not play, or at least be limited in the Alabama ball game. That's pretty devastating. So I think that first has to be noted that regardless of how Tennessee's played up to this point, particularly defensively, where they're out 5 defensive starters, half the starting defense is injured as of the end of the Texas A&M game. How does that affect the statistics? So even what we're about to say may not have come true, but the key to me really comes down to the fact that Alabama is starting to run a lot of RPO concepts. Tennessee runs RPO concepts. Who's better at defending them? And that flips back around to the injuries and the way the defenses have operated. Alabama's defense to this point is giving up a terrifying 53% of opponent averages running the ball. That's crazy. Just crazy. Normally, anything from 80 to 90% is good. About 80% is very good. Anything below 80, especially below 75%, I consider elite. If you're at 50%, you're just otherworldly. And the thing that's making them so good in large part is that Alabama probably has 3 NFL linebackers. I think Reuben Foster is possibly the best linebacker they've ever had. He's up there with Rolando McClain, in my opinion. I think he is that good. Now, he's a small concussion and may not play. But on the other hand, the next 2 guys they've got, Rashawn Evans and Sean De'Am Hamilton, who's very underrated, are also both probably NFL linebackers. I mean, it's just it's a great core. They've got 3 guys that would start for everybody in the conference.
So let me ask you a different question in terms of their running allowance. I think some of this, I could be completely wrong. Um, I think every team knows going into the Alabama game that running between the tackles is going to be really hard. So they game plan around the one known weakness for Alabama, and that's throwing the ball. So it's almost like their running at all is completely obligatory, and they don't commit to it, and they're not doing much with it. So part of it, I wonder, it's like if you know Alabama's great at run defense, maybe the numbers are a little bit skewed because people just aren't trying to run against them.
Maybe, but usually you see the opposite, right? I mean, if you know that you aren't going to be able to run the ball well, and you're going to only run it sparingly, Normally, the other team starts playing to the pass and they give up more rush yards when you do run it, right? Because they're starting to scheme. They adjust defensively to the run game or they fall asleep. It's kind of spectacular that they've been this good and that teams are starting to try to throw the ball on them deep and they still can't run the ball on Alabama. It's just it's just the front seven is phenomenal. I know I sound like I'm throwing on a heap of praise, but it is a special front seven, as good as they were last year. I mean, they were a rock against the run last year. They are a lot more active in terms of disruption this year, and this comes back to the injury thing in that both teams are running RPO concepts, right, where the quarterback gets the ball. He's going to run to the boundary and he's going to either, maybe he flips it to the running back, maybe he tries to dump it over the top, but you're stressing the corners and the safeties are either have to stay in coverage, and if they chase the receiver downfield, then they vacate the boundary, which lets the quarterbacks, who are both running quarterbacks, run down the boundary. And if they try to crash down on the quarterback, then they give up a huge play through the air because they're going to have a guy running down the field free. And that's the difficulty of defending the RPO. But the way you stop the RPO is you have a middle linebacker or an outside linebacker that can shade the quarterback and follow him sideline to sideline, so that when he runs the RPO, the linebacker makes the tackle or forces him to the edge, and the corner can just worry about coverage. With the injuries to Reeves-Maybin and Kirkland, there is a really significant edge that Alabama has at defending those RPO concepts versus Tennessee. And I think people think of Hurts as the running quarterback of the two, but Hurts averages 10 yards, 10 attempts per game, and Dobbs averages 14. And Hurts has been about a half yard more effective. He's about 4.7 yards per carry. Dobbs has about 3.95, but Dobbs runs the ball more frequently than Hurts does.
How much of that is because of schedule, though?
A little bit due to schedule. But I think Tennessee really tried to avoid running Dobbs early. I mean, the past several games, they've run him a lot, and it's a big part of their new offense that they're trying to operate this year. And I think they're doing it a little bit because the passing game hasn't been as good as they wanted it to be. But I mean, Jalen Hurd has the smallest number of carries. That he's. I mean, not Jalen Hurd, but Joshua Dobbs. I mean, the smallest number of rushes that he's had in the past few weeks was 11 against Georgia, but he's been double digits every week after week one. 14 carries, 17 carries, 11, 17. And one of the concerning things is other teams are starting to notice, and his yardage is dropping. He was 4 to 7 yards per carry the first few games, and he's down to 2.5 against Georgia, under 3.5 against Texas A&M.
Part of me thinks that it's not such a bad thing because it forces him to throw a little bit more. And from a pure numbers perspective, we've seen since his running has been less effective in the last few games, his throwing has actually been pretty good. I'll say save the Georgia game because statistically it wasn't anything special. But against A&M, he poured it on, especially late, and same thing with Florida. But and maybe speak to this because I think you and I disagree a little bit. I wonder if they're having to run him because they're not getting the production out of Hurd that they thought they were going to get and that they were counting on going into the year. I know you're big on Hurd, and I haven't been real big on him. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they're running him because Hurd is hurt. I mean, they've acknowledged that he didn't travel to the Texas A&M game. How hurt, we have really no idea. But I think this was always the design. It's freeing up some stuff throwing the ball. Again, the RPO concepts put a lot of strain in corners and safeties, and teams are starting to key more on Dobbs as a runner. I think Dobbs running the ball basically won them the Ohio game, maybe the Florida game, and almost certainly I think the Georgia game, even though he didn't carry it that much, just because of key moments. But the Florida game in particular had 4.7 yards a carry on 17 carries. I mean, that was the biggest key for them to winning the Florida game. Teams aren't going to let Dobbs run it anymore. He hasn't been terribly accurate, and the trick is they're starting to play Dobbs in the run game and keep safeties down, and it is making it easier for them to throw the ball. So I think it's entirely intentional. Here's an interesting comparison that I make between Hurts and Dobbs and how they're working, right? In the major every major statistical category. So that's completion percentage, yards per attempt, QB rating. Out of those three, Jalen Hurts varies between third and fifth in the SEC. Joshua Dobbs varies between second and seventh. So Hurts is like the fourth best quarterback, period. Dobbs is anywhere from the second best in the conference, to dead average, seventh in the conference. And the reason for that
Right.
variance is Hurts's best statistic is completion percentage. He's third in the SEC, and his worst, fifth in the SEC, is actually touchdowns. Dobbs is the exact opposite. His best statistic is touchdowns. He's second in the conference in touchdowns thrown, and he's seventh in the conference in completion percentage. So Dobbs is basically even though they both run RPO schemes, even though sometimes you'd be tempted to say they're similar, Dobbs' issue is that he isn't very accurate with the football, but he tries to make a lot of big plays, and they're basically trying to make explosive plays. And the flip side, Alabama asks a lot less of Jalen Hurts, so he has a higher completion percentage, but they don't generate explosive plays. So what I'm getting at is Tennessee puts a lot more stress on Dobbs, both as a runner and a passer, to key the offense. And I think it's in large part because Alabama has some phenomenal receivers. They have great backs. They have a good offensive line. They don't need Hurts to win the game. They just want him not to lose it. Tennessee is a lot more aware of what they need out of Dobbs. And to circle back to your question about Hurd, right? I haven't forgotten. The thing is, Hurd hasn't been as effective. He hasn't, partly due to injury, partly due to whatever. Tennessee's aware of that, and they're relying on Dobbs as a runner and a passer to generate offense a lot more than a lot of teams are with their quarterback. And they kind of get to wherever they are based off Dobbs' arm.
Right. Right.
Dobbs nearly won them the A&M game, and then he lost it in overtime. And that's the story for Tennessee right now.
And it's funny because you say that because that's been the case in every game. It just so happened that in every game, it's a perfect microcosm. In every game, Dobbs has both put them in the position they were in and got them out of the position they were in. So the same thing happened against A&M. He put them there, he got them out, but he put them back in.
Right. And we talked about earlier in the year the zone read concepts, and they weren't really trying to execute them. Now they have. They've been more effective. Teams are starting to get better as they play better, faster defenses. A&M was disruptive. I am not at all sold that A&M's defense is particularly good, particularly the back seven. I don't think the back seven in A&M is great. And, Alabama is on a different level. And if they try to make Dobbs do everything, Austin Allen just had a very successful game. But the reason Austin Allen was successful is Austin Allen is an extremely accurate passer with a big arm.
Yeah, he's a better thrower than Dobbs, and I think to your very excellent point about what they're asking of Dobbs, I think Dan Enos at Arkansas is doing a lot better job from what I saw in Allen in setting him up for success. Like, yes, they're relying on his arm, but they're relying on his arm within scheme and within that context so he can execute a play and be successful. Whereas I think Dobbs has been put into some situations where he's having to do some things. We talked about it in our review show. He's having to do some things that maybe they shouldn't be asking of him.
Right, absolutely. I mean, Dobbs has the ball a lot. I mean, he just 17 carries in the game. He has 47 attempts. There's 64 touches. 64. And he's not doing all that great. He's only a 58% passer right now, 8 yards per attempt. These aren't phenomenal statistics. Again, that completion percentage is particularly low, but it's because,
like you said, dead average.
But it's because he's being asked to throw over and over and over and over and over. And, he sometimes he can make a play, sometimes he can't, but he's not that accurate to start with. Ideally, Joshua Dobbs would be a guy that you would use like Jalen Hurts, and you would limit what you're asking him to do and let him use his arm and his intelligence to just run the offense and take the play that's there. But I don't know if they're forced to, but they're choosing to rely on Dobbs to generate offense in the way that Allen very much did for Arkansas against Alabama. The problem is that accuracy issue doesn't just magically disappear. And as much as he's going to generate offense at times, he's also going to have times when he's not. I think he's taken game time in every game to warm up, but I also think it's just the opposing defense starts getting tired and he has bigger windows. The accuracy becomes less of an issue, right? The more open the guy is, the less accuracy matters. And
So
it's just
go
yeah. I
ahead.
mean, I think he's being asked to do too much right now in this offense.
So tell me this, from listening to Tennessee fans, a little bit of talk radio, for over a year now, they've been just begging for Alvin Kamara to get the ball more. So I wonder, and it's never a blessing when a guy gets hurt. It's never a blessing in disguise, I don't think. But it did open up an opportunity for maybe Dobbs to have a newfound weapon in Alvin Kamara, and maybe he's one of those doesn't do well in practice. That's why he doesn't get a lot of reps. But then the lights came on. He was forced into this role, and then he's their leading receiver, 8 receptions, 161 yards at 20 yards per touch. Have they found something that can be a new dimension to that offense, or is it just a situation where maybe it was a one game, one off scenario?
I think it is. It is a better dimension of the offense, and I think it's stylistic. Dobbs is not a fast runner. I mean, he's athletic enough to run the ball, but he is definitely a power runner as a quarterback.
He's a plotter for sure.
And there's an inside zone read and an outside zone read concept. The inside zone read means the running back is key to run a dive play, and the quarterback reads the defensive end to run off tackle. And then the outside zone read means the running back is running a sweep, and if he doesn't take the ball, the quarterback runs up the middle. Dobbs is a lot better at the outside zone read because of his build. He's a plotter, as you said, physical, athletic enough to run the ball, but he's probably not fast enough to get the edge all that often. With Kamara, you have a better sweep back. He's faster. So you can run the outside zone read with Kamara, with Dobbs as a threat to the inside run, Kamara's the outside run, and be pretty effective with it. When you flipped it and heard they were running the inside zone read with a physical running back, Dobbs then has his keep is an outside play, and he's not fast enough to get the edge. So by losing Hurd, it's forcing them to really run the play that Dobbs is better at running with a running back that's better suited to complement Dobbs. And the other part we talked about, the RPOs, when they run those RPOs and the running back is either a pitch man or he's running out on a route in front of the quarterback, Kamara is the superior pass catcher, and that's been a big deal for him. And because he's faster on those RPO options, if any of the linebacker or the corner crashes on Dobbs and they leave Kamara uncovered, he can flip the ball to Kamara and he can generate a lot of offense in the passing game.
Right, and I think that's a point that's pretty nuanced because fumble on the 1 yard line aside, I think Hurd is an effective pass catching running back, but he's not the space player that Kamara is. And when Dobbs needs a bailout, he needs a bailout for something that somebody can do some work in space. And I think that's what you're alluding to there. So yeah, Jalen Hurd might be a guy that's going to catch the ball almost every time you throw it to him, but he's not going to turn 4 into 40 by making 3 guys miss. Kamara might.
Right. And if this was a different sort of quarterback, if this was Lamar Jackson, if this was Nick Marshall, you want Jalen Hurd because then you'd have a
Right.
quarterback that's stressing the perimeter with a run game, and you want a big guy to push the interior line. It just so happens that Dobb is a more powerful quarterback, and Kamara is just a better complement. I think Hurd is probably a better running back when healthy than Kamara. I do. He's a very good running back. It's
Well, the coaches do too, and they see him every practice,
right.
so they agree
And
with
there's
you.
a reason he was the starter from that perspective. Frankly, we've talked about it a little bit. I mean, I don't have a ton of confidence as DeBoer as an offensive coordinator. His track record's not real great. I think they made a mistake by sticking with Hurd because Hurd was the better back. When, yeah, even though he is the better back, Kamara is the better complement for what they're trying to do with Dobbs. And that's the reason they've been a little bit more effective. To turn this a little bit, the flip side of that, though, is the turnovers. And Kamara does turn the ball over. He fumbles a lot more. And did you see a turnover or two in that Tennessee Texas A&M game?
Yeah, a multiple of that.
Sort of put this in perspective. Tennessee lost 5 fumbles in Texas A&M against Texas A&M, right?
Right.
If a team had nothing but those 5 fumbles recovered from Tennessee, That would be 5th nationally in fumbles recovered on the season. 5 is a lot. And you could say it's a one-off, but the problem with Kamara and this offense, and I think it's a problem with the RPO concepts, is that it is a little bit turnover prone. And getting back to the discussion of Tennessee versus Alabama, Alabama is very effective at rushing the passer, and they move sidelines to sidelines very well with their linebackers. And those turnover issues and that disruption stuff is going to be intensified to a very high level. I know Garrett's a very good edge rusher. I get that, but they don't have an overall front seven with this sort of speed and disruption.
No, and Garrett was hurt. Garrett was hurt in that game. It was clear, and he was still effective. So I think you're right. They're going to see a lot of that. I do want to bust your chops a little bit though, because what we've heard and what we've talked about every week on this show is the variable nature of turnovers, especially fumbles. And now you're kind of changing that a little bit and saying this is part of the DNA. So you got to defend yourself there a little bit.
Yeah, well, you probably have a point there to some degree that I am kind of playing both sides of the coin, but fumble recovery is a random stat. There's
Right.
no way to predict who will or will not recover a fumble. But interceptions is actually fairly predictable. Fumbles is not overly predictable, but it is a little bit predictable. So the fact that they are constantly in a position to create turnovers or to give them up is a trend. The thing that is variable is whether or not they actually happen or whether or not the other team gets them. Whether they catch the interception is somewhat random, but certainly whether or not they recover the fumbles, which we talked about in the discussing in the review, but they had bad luck against A&M with losing all their fumbles, where they had exceptionally good luck in the other games about getting them all back. And it can go either way, but at the same time, that I'm saying that their style of offense creates a lot of those opportunities, and I think that is the fact that there's an opportunity for it to happen is a little bit predictable.
I think that's fair. I think I just, I think that there's so much nuance. Numbers are a hard statistic that, when you're looking at numbers, it looks like a black and white thing. But I think that if we're going to talk about numbers on this show and if we're going to get into the details, I think it's fair that we explore the nuances of what we're talking about. And I think you did a really good job there.
Anyway, without further ado, I think if you're up for it, let's go ahead and break down the actual conclusionary numbers we get out of the model and where that takes me.
I think that's great.
All right. So, rush versus the pass, Tennessee. The thing that struck me about Tennessee is that their defense is not particularly good against opponent averages. I mean, they're allowing 4.5 yards per carry. They're giving up 6.6 yards per attempt. That yard per attempt number sounds pretty good, but they haven't played very many good passing offenses.
Right.
They're giving up 95% of opponent rush totals. They're giving up 96% of opponent pass totals. We talked about that last week in the Texas A&M Tennessee game, and it's still there. And the other side, Alabama, as I said earlier, 53% of opponent averages in the rush. They haven't played fantastic rushing offenses, but good Lord. I mean, they're only allowing 2.2 yards per carry on the season. And
Right.
their pass defense is not great. It's 84%. And as I said, 80 to 90 is good. And they're probably in the very good range, but they're not elite right now. Whether or not that changes is a different question. But they're only allowing 6.7 yards per attempt. But again, in Alabama's case, they've played some really good passing offenses, and they played some that aren't very good. Now, I will say that's skewed because the teams they played that were really good passing offenses, Ole Miss and Arkansas, threw a lot of passes, and that means their yard per attempt number is inflated towards the two games they played where the teams were good that threw the ball a lot, and the teams that weren't very good, Southern Cal or Kent State or Kentucky, didn't throw the ball much. So the Ole Miss and Arkansas game basically are much more heavily weighted. Regardless, Alabama has a significant edge in the run game on both sides of the ball. Then on the passing game, it's a little more of a draw, but to come up with a conclusion based off these percentage allowed and season averages, Alabama probably should average about 5.4 yards a carry, which is enough to sustain a drive, and they're going to average about 8 yards an attempt, and that's pretty high. Tennessee, on the other hand, should average about 2.3 yards per carry, according to the model. That's what you should expect. They
Yikes.
should not be able to run the ball, and their pass game should be about 6.5 yards per attempt. That's enough to score. The problem is Alabama is projected to just be able to generate way too much offense. 6.7 yards per play on average to Tennessee's 4.5. And when you plot that out with a distribution that we're running, that comes out to a 44-26 score in favor of Alabama. It's just a situation where Alabama uh, offensively is really too much. Tennessee's going to generate some offense, but this model is saying that Tennessee's defense just isn't good enough to really slow Alabama down very much in this ball game.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting to me because you touched on Tennessee's passing defense not being that great, and they had some numbers that sounded great, but then when you put it into perspective, you're right. They haven't faced really good offenses. The 4 games that Eason has started this year against FBS opponents, Tennessee was by far his best game. I think your point is well made, and I also think they're going to see a lot of struggles that they haven't previously seen in that passing defensive, scheme because they've lost so many important players, and not necessarily, obviously, one important one in Sutton in the secondary, but that front 7, the injuries piling up, is going to affect the passing game or the pass defense.
Right. And, I'll note that I didn't even get to take into account the South Carolina-Georgia game because it was played too late when I was doing this model. So it's probably
Right.
even a little bit worse than I was showing. But yeah, Tennessee has benefited from playing teams that do not throw the ball very well. And when you take that into account, they've been pretty darn average. Again, A&M was only averaging 6.4 yards per attempt, and they had 6.8 against Tennessee. As good as Tennessee was or was not in that game, A&M was above average for their season, and that's not been atypical.
So one of the things your model can take into consideration is stylistically how teams defend certain types of offenses, and I think where we saw. So take a step back. I think we saw Allen and Arkansas have some success against this Alabama defense as an offense that does not run it. And I think we've seen Tennessee be fairly ineffective running the ball this year. So I feel like their game plan is going to be fairly similar, even though they're an RPO offense and not a pure pocket passing offense. But I don't think that approach is going to be successful without a running game against this defense and without the accuracy from a pocket passer in Josh Dobbs, and without the ability to run the ball quickly to the edges. I mean, even last year against Alabama, he wasn't hugely effective as a quarterback, and I just think the speed is there defensively that it neutralizes some of him as a runner, which is going to force him to throw the ball. And I think we're going to see him really struggle there. Yeah, they might hit some deep shots, but I think from a scoring standpoint, I don't know that I agree with the model for Alabama. I don't know that they're going to score that much, but I also don't think they're going to give up as much as the model says either.
Yeah, I was going to say the one thing there is those linebacker injuries. Reeves-Maben and Kirkland being out means Tennessee's going to struggle, as I talked about, getting to Hurts, and that's the flip side in the RPO concepts. Alabama's well built to stop the RPO concepts. I think that's the single key to the game. They're not going to be able to get Dobbs to the edge. Alabama will probably get Hurts to the edge, and that will be why Alabama wins.
I think this Tennessee team is probably a little defeated mentally, just because it's been such a grind and it's such an emotional roller coaster so far to this point. And then when you see so many injuries pile up, that it just takes its toll. A&M beat them up a little bit. They were already a little bit beaten up going into that game. The one player that is starting to get some love, and I think it's deserved, is Barnett. And I think it will be a great matchup to watch, because he's going to go up against a pretty good offensive line, probably the best he's seen this year, but he still has the ability to impact the game by himself. So I'm interested to see what he does. But on Alabama's side, from an offensive standpoint, and tell me if I'm crazy here, but I still think there's a good bit of the Alabama offense that we haven't seen yet. And the reason I say that is a couple of things. One, I think it's obvious that they have the ability to run Hurts more than they're running him. And two, we saw that the screen pass that Harris scored on where he almost stepped out of bounds against Arkansas, that was a screen look off of, I think it was off of the jet sweep fake that we haven't seen all year. And it was highly effective. And maybe I'm crazy. Maybe 6-7 weeks into the season, we've seen everything they got. But maybe talk on that a little bit. Do teams hold back at this point in the year? Is there still something left that we haven't seen?
I think
we've pretty much seen what Alabama's got offensively.
Absolutely are starting to open things up. And there's a couple of reasons for it. The first is, they started with Southern Cal, and they kind of played around with quarterbacks, and all of a sudden found themselves up a ton and didn't have to do much. After that, Western Kentucky, Kent State, and Kentucky, not real threats.
Right.
And the Ole Miss game was, but the problem with that game is Hurts had only been recently named the starter, and I don't think he knew a ton of the playbook. They were trying to keep things limited. So it's a two-pronged effect. One, Alabama's getting the meat of their schedule. They didn't have too many rough opponents, so they had a pretty tailored playbook for Ole Miss, and other than that, have kept everything under wraps. And the second thing is, I think a lot of this was stuff they would have loved to have run earlier in the year, and they're just now getting to the point where they have a quarterback who's comfortable executing it. And so their playbook, I think, will expand every single week through the end of the season, not so much because they're hiding stuff, but to a large degree, it's just because, I talked about this, I think, week one, Hurts, as of this week, has probably had as many reps during the past 6 weeks, of the season as he had the entire rest of his college career. He's had as many practices and throws and chances to play with the offense from Southern Cal to today at Arkansas as he had from January through into fall camp. And it's going to increase because, again, he's going to, basically double that again by the end of the season. And every single week he's going to learn a little bit more of the offense, and they're going to open up things a bit more. So, yeah, I think we're going to continue to see more variety, and that variety is going to greatly increase the effectiveness of that Alabama offense.
I think Tennessee's going to struggle a little bit in that they don't have the receivers that I think they'd need to really take advantage of this Alabama secondary. What I do like about Tennessee is that they find ways to score a boatload of points. I mean, since the Appalachian State game, they've found a way, and they struggled a little bit with Ohio. They find a way to score some points. So for me, I'm going to pick Alabama in this one, 37-20, and I could see it being uncomfortable early. I think Tennessee's going to start better than they have started. And Alabama's still kind of a slow starter this game against Arkansas aside. So give me 37-20, mostly late for Alabama, second half, I should say. I think Tennessee, just with the injuries and the lack of depth, they're going to run out of gas.
Right. And, I'm going to go a little bit further, and I'm actually going to take it I'm going to say 42-13.
Yikes.
Yeah, it would be completely different without the injuries, but I think those injuries are just devastating.
And this score prediction is probably going to piss off a lot of people, but we say it every single week. We're brutally honest here. We call it like we see it. Our predictions so far have, even though pissed a lot of people off, have been pretty accurate. So we're not saying this because we're being homers or fans of any particular team. We're saying this because this is what the numbers are telling us, and you're bringing a team in to face Alabama, and it's a beaten and battered crew. I don't see this being as close as maybe some people think based on the records and the success up to this point. I will still give the same caveat I gave last week. I still think Jalen Hurts for Alabama is a bit of a wild card in terms of his ability to produce consistently. So that could cause some problems, but I still think it's a pretty comfortable win for Alabama. All right, so next up, Ole Miss, Arkansas. I think this is kind of a cool game to think about because Ole Miss has quietly kept moving on. They had a couple of bad losses in terms of giving games away. If you're an Ole Miss fan, they'd tell you that. But offensively, they've still maintained that juggernaut status. And as long as Chad Kelly's under center, it's going to remain the same. But now we see an Arkansas team that might be able to put some points up on this Ole Miss defense. So where if you asked me 3 weeks ago, I'd say Ole Miss, this is just another game on their schedule that they're going to count as a win on their way to not losing another game in the regular season. I still think they win this game, but I think it's going to be a lot more fun of a game to watch than maybe I would have predicted 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, these are the two. Here, it's the big tagline thing, right? These are the two highest quarterback rating quarterbacks in the conference. 163.1 for Kelly, 158 for Austin Allen. And breaking down the statistics, Arkansas is Ole Miss light. I mean, they're just everywhere Ole Miss is good, Arkansas is good and not quite as good. And everywhere Ole Miss is bad, Arkansas is simply not as bad. And to explain that, Ole Miss is number 1 in yards per attempt. Arkansas is number 2. And then Ole Miss is a little weak in the run game, number 7 in yard per carry. Arkansas is right behind them at number 9. Flip it around, passing, defensively, Ole Miss is number 6 in pass defense. Arkansas is 12th. And then Ole Miss is 12th in run defense, and Arkansas is 14th. Again, everything across the board is just a little worse for Arkansas. The one exception is passing defense, where Ole Miss is competent and Arkansas is bad. And that it's a short answer, but like that to me is probably the ball game, and that's that you have two great passing teams. The problem is Ole Miss has been at least competent defending the pass, and Arkansas really has not been at all competent defending the pass. And so you're going to end up with a game that will probably be a shootout, but Ole Miss should be a little more consistently able to score. I think the receivers are a little bit better, the quarterback's a little bit better, the offensive line's a little bit better. And that to me is the ball game.
So here's an interesting maybe subtopic for this game that is probably completely worthless, but it's my show, so I can talk about it. I have this theory that teams who have a really good pass-catching tight end, for whatever reason, struggle to defend a really good pass-catching tight end. And the one I like to cite right now is Clemson. They have a great tight end in Leggett, but they cannot, for the life of them, cover a tight end. We saw it in the title game. O.J. Howard made a lot of money that night. And Alabama, to a certain extent, struggles with tight ends. Ingram has killed them every year. Arkansas tight ends have eaten them alive. Is that a thing? Like, is that like from a scheme standpoint or a practice standpoint, is that a thing? And I ask that because I'm kind of excited to see what Sprinkle might be able to do to an Ole Miss team that's used to doing that with their tight end in Ingram.
Yeah, I'm trying to follow the logic there. To be honest, I don't know.
It's fair.
I mean, it's an interesting point. Does the fact that you have a pass catching tight end make it harder to cover a pass catching tight end? I mean, you wouldn't think so, right? You think you cover it. Well, the one thing I'll say is, you think, well, they got they're used to playing Evan Ingram in practice, or they're used to playing O.J. Howard. It's like, no, the starting defense does not play against Evan Ingram in practice. They play against the scout team. And, maybe the deal is when you're a tight end first offense that the tight ends are featured more in the starting offense. I mean, maybe that's true. That the more you focus on tight ends, the more you tend to elevate them up to the starting roster and not have them on the scout team, or the guys left on the scout team aren't very good. And so the defense doesn't get good reps against tight ends in the passing game. I mean, maybe that's it. Maybe that's your answer.
That was actually a really impressive way to bail me out on a stupid question, because you dug deep and got a pretty solid. I think that's a fair answer.
I would take that, and I wouldn't really question it. I would sort of like put it in the bank. It's like somebody gives you a coin, tells you it's gold. Don't bite it or anything. Just I wouldn't, but I wouldn't try to go sell that anywhere either, because that may not turn out well for you.
So, and that was kind of a circuitous route to get back to the point that I was originally making. That I love Jeremy Sprinkle as a pass catching tight end in this Arkansas offense, and I expect him to be successful against this Ole Miss defense. Maybe it's not enough, and maybe Ingram has an even bigger day, but Arkansas has some weapons on offense, and they will have some success. I think, like you, it might be one of those that's a really fun watch that they just run out of gas at the end. But definitely, if you got the time, you need to find this game on TV and give it a
Yep,
look.
totally agree. And I'll give you a couple more stats that are kind of interesting turning points. First is I thought this game would be solved through disruption. Like I really thought that would be the defining characteristic because there's a lot of talk about how disruptive Ole Miss's defensive line is, and the eyeball test says they are, but they're only 88th nationally in sacks. I mean, Arkansas is not much better; they're 65th. But the fact that neither one of these teams is being able to often sack the quarterback kind of makes you think it's going to be a shootout. And the one thing
Right.
that I think is changing a little bit is Ole Miss has gotten a run game going. Brasley's kind of shown up for them, 7.2 yard per carry guy. Judd's been kind of getting going. So there's a little bit of a run game for Ole Miss. And that, again, I don't think Arkansas really has a run game this year. So that,
And it's interesting too because it's not the same thing where Sumlin has decided to really commit to the run at A&M and it's a feature. It's one of those things where it's almost like Hugh Freeze has been beaten up year in and year out, saying you gotta run the ball, you gotta run the ball, and he's like, all right, fine, I'll run the ball just to shut you people up. But on accident, he's actually having some success with it.
yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think he's sort of I've never been a huge fan of Hugh Freeze's concepts as a play caller at times. I think it's a mistake that he doesn't have any true power sets. He at least moved from a used to run regular shotgun sets and goal line scenarios. And he's finally at least adopted the pistol so that he can have his back going downfield. And why does that matter? It's not the depth of the back, it's the position in that case. The fact that you want the running back behind the quarterback so when he gets the ball, he already has forward momentum. If you put him in the shotgun, he's next to the quarterback. So he either has to get the ball and then start running forward, or he gets the ball already running at an angle to the line of scrimmage. And in the same way, I think sometimes Freeze does just kind of abandon the run. And when you do that, the defensive line does notice, and it's not a video game. They realize you're not going to throw the ball. They stop respecting their gaps and they start coming straight from the passer. I think that happened a little bit in the Florida State game, and that's why I think that's why they had such a bad second half. Is they just gave up on trying to even run the ball, and Florida State teed off. So being able to commit a little bit, even if it's not effective, you've got to be able to do it enough where the defense at least says, okay, if we completely ignore it, they are going to be able to move the sticks. And that does make the passing game a lot more effective.
Okay, so a lot of people looked at the Ole Miss score last week against Memphis and had some of the similar frustrations that Alabama had in terms of giving up 30 points to Arkansas and maybe not having as dominant a performance as they think they should have. But I'm going to flip that a little bit and say a 48-28 win over Memphis is actually really, really good. What do you
I
think?
mean, Memphis is a pretty significantly potent passing offense. They're
Yeah, Riley
I
Ferguson's a
mean
good
they're
quarterback.
basically passing. They're 8.3 yards per attempt, right behind Alabama at 8.4. Very similar QB rating, same number of touchdowns, about the same, a little bit higher completion percentage. It's a very potent passing offense and a potent team. I mean, there was nothing wrong with that, other than people say they're Memphis, but Memphis was a major bowl team last year. They may have lost their quarterback, taken a little bit of a step back, but that was still a pretty darn good team that they just blew out.
Yeah, and they're not in a great conference, not going to have a bunch of big wins, but they're going to win probably 10 games this year, and I think they'll beat Houston. So everybody that's kind of killing Ole Miss for giving up almost 30 to Memphis, I wouldn't look at it that way. I'd look at it the fact that they beat them by 20, and that's about all you can ask for right now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay, so predictions on this one. What I would like for you to theorize here is just so everybody knows, these models that we build for the game of the week take forever, so we don't do them for every game. But knowing what you know about how your models are constructed, if you had to guess, what would you say the computers would say on Ole Miss Arkansas, and then is that in line with what you would think it'd be?
I'm gonna guess the computers would probably predict this to be, oh gosh, something like a 35-49 game.
Wow.
And it's probably accurate. I
Okay.
I think this is going to be a shootout that slowly gets away from Arkansas. Ole Miss is never able to take off the throttle because Arkansas is a constant threat to come back. I could see this getting a little out of hand if Allen gets too banged up, but he's survived that for the past few games. I
Sure.
mean, he's probably going to have a guy sitting on top of him after every play, but that's just another day out of the office at this point for Austin Allen. So yeah, I mean they're going to just keep taking shots over and over, and even if one team or the other builds a little bit of a lead, and it probably will happen at some point, and it may start off Arkansas, it may start off Ole Miss. I don't know. It's not going to mean much because they're going to keep throwing the ball down the field, and eventually they're going to connect a couple times, and boom, 14 points in 2 minutes. It's there's going to be some period in this game. I virtually guarantee you where you're going to have like 21 points scored or 28 points in like a 4 minute span.
Yeah,
It's gonna happen.
give me 40-28 uh Ole Miss. I think they're going to do a little better than maybe predicted just because they did have a bye week. I mean, they had a bye week while Arkansas was getting their brains beat in physically by Alabama. So I think that might take its toll a little bit. But I think Arkansas got some energy from that game, at least mentally. They took something away from that game against Alabama that I think they can build on. I just don't think they have enough horses to run with Ole Miss. And I think Ole Miss sees at this point, looking at what they've got ahead of them, that they can actually do something of significance this year. So I don't think they're playing any more games at this point. I think they're going to come out, they're going to do pretty well and give up a late touchdown, kind of like Alabama did, and make it look a little better on the scoreboard. All right, so our last game this week is kind of a weird one. Florida and Missouri. There's not. It's funny because there's not a lot to talk about because it's almost like Missouri has been playing this whole year as just a team outside the SEC that happens to play a bunch of teams in the SEC. It just feels that way, and it's not fair to Missouri, but they just don't feel like they're part of the group this year, and I don't know why. It's just they've been quiet and out in the ether. And then you've got Florida, who, they had that game against Tennessee that was really hyped up, and they were highly rated. And then they didn't play LSU, so we don't know much about either of these teams. We know that Florida's probably going to have their quarterback back at this point. And they're probably going to be a better defensive unit than Missouri, maybe not by much. But what are the numbers telling us in this game, and really, what do you think about it?
Well, I think the answer to the first part, by the way, why they feel like they're outside the conference, that happens when you play Eastern Michigan and Delaware State in your first 5 games, and then you're off. So yeah, they've played Georgia and LSU in the conference, and they lost West Virginia in the opener. And it's otherwise most of their games have not been conference games. And the twos they did play, one was a Georgia game that was pretty sloppy, and the other was an LSU game that got really out of hand. But looking at it, it's not all that different from Ole Miss Arkansas that we've discussed in that Missouri is a lot like Florida, but just not quite as good in a lot of ways. It, Missouri running the ball, not very effective, 11th in the conference, 4.32 yards a carry. Well, Florida, not very good running the ball, 12th in the conference, 4.28 yards per carry. Missouri is better passing it, 8.4 yards per attempt than Florida, 7.1 yards per attempt. And then you flip the script, and I think there's a perception that Missouri's defense is terrible. And they are terrible against the run. They're 10th, 4.5 yards a carry. Florida's been phenomenal against the run. They're holding teams to 2.5. That's second in the conference, just behind Alabama, who's also been elite. But the pass defenses are actually dead tied, 5.9 yards per attempt allowed by both teams. So, you know, Florida has a significant edge in that their run defense is a lot better, but Missouri's passing offense has been a lot better. And I'll take a step further, and I think there's a perception that when they lost Del Rio, they took a huge step back. I know I perceived it that way, but the numbers don't really completely support that.
And I think they don't support it because we didn't expect them to be this, like, I think they were more average than we gave them credit for in the beginning. So there wasn't that drop off because bad without a decent quarterback is still bad.
Right. Del Rio and Appleby both have 61% completion percentage. They both have a 3-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. The only difference is Del Rio averaged 7.5 yards an attempt, and Appleby averaged 6.5. And a little bit of that can be explained by the fact that, Del Rio got to play UMass and Kentucky, and they didn't have to play Tennessee.
Right.
And Vandy, who's actually getting to be decently good again on defense, though they can't quite make up their minds whether or not they're actually a decent team or not. But it's tough because I would have really expected to say Florida had a lot of edges. This is a little bit of an upset special. Missouri has some advantages over Florida, particularly the fact that their offense is better. The one thing they really struggle with is defending the run, but Florida can establish the run. So, I'm not saying Missouri will win the game, and like everything Florida plays, there's a good chance this is going to be an ugly, unwatchable affair. But it's equally possible that Missouri could sort of hang around in a low-scoring game and generate some pass plays to win. I think the one question is whether or not Missouri's defense, who to this point has not been able to stop a paper bag from running the ball, can hold up against Florida.
So I'm with you. I have Missouri in this one as well, and the difference for me is Drew Lock at quarterback for Missouri, who, he's not going to set the world on fire this year, but he's a competent quarterback who's got some experience under his belt. And seeing what Florida allowed against Tennessee and knowing how successful Drew Lock was, frankly, against a Georgia defense that's not a poor secondary. They're not a bad pass defense. They're not great. But anyway, he's had some successes, and I think Florida is bad at quarterback and running back. And what's crazy to me is we've seen Florida the last couple of years have these issues at quarterback and their offense falls off the map. But what's crazy to me is you're the Florida Gators. Why don't you have a stable of running backs? Why don't you have a running game that's successful? You can recruit. You got a very talent-rich state. They need to be able to run the ball. And you can have a really good quarterback and a crappy offense if you can't run the ball. So until they get back to that, they're going to be a really bad offense. And for that, against an okay defense, I don't think they're going to score very much.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of a not so fast there. I don't necessarily think that Missouri will win this game. I just think they can. I still think Florida will probably run the ball well enough to win. And I'm also really concerned by the fact that Locke had really actually pretty darn good statistical games against West Virginia, Eastern Michigan, Delaware State, and Georgia. Against LSU, not so much, right? 45% completion percentage. His ESPN QBR is 17 in that ball game against LSU. And that's, really deeply concerning to me how he's going to be able to do against a team with a better secondary. Again, he was only 45% completion percentage against West Virginia. Threw 51 passes in that ball game, and they managed to score 11 points.
But in the same vein, what did Florida secondary give up to Dobbs? I mean, that was pretty significant.
Now, I'm with you. I mean, in Florida, if you're a struggling quarterback, the thing you want to face is a secondary that blows coverage, right? A struggling quarterback doesn't want to face a secondary that plays their assignments, even if they're not really on top of the guy, because then when you make a mistake, the other team can take advantage of it. What you want is a guy that's wide open running down the field on a bust, because then you've just got to arm punt the ball to him.
Right.
And that's the way Florida struggled. And that's the way that Missouri, and Locke can generate some offense and maybe score some points. Again, the problem here isn't that I think Missouri's going to go off offensively. I'm not really sure that Florida is going to be able to generate the offense against Missouri that some teams have. They don't run the ball as well as Georgia does. and Georgia had to really had to throw to come back, and that if they got to throw the ball to come back against a Missouri defense that is still second in the conference in yards per allowed, that that could be a recipe for a loss.
I think, they scored 13 on Vanderbilt, who actually I think Vanderbilt has a better defense than Missouri, if we're being fair, and then really struggled with UMass. So I'm sticking with it. Give me Missouri 17-14. And again, if you're not a Georgia or Missouri fan, I hate to say it, but probably don't watch this game. It's going to bore you to tears.
Yeah, well, I mean, I almost felt obligated to talk about Missouri this year because we haven't a lot. Again, not really, in our defense, we haven't talked about them because they haven't played a lot of major SEC games except for that Georgia game. And I don't think either one of us really had a lot of confidence when they played LSU, considering they could not stop the run.
Yeah, you can't be bad and not play other SEC teams and get any kind of airtime on an SEC show.
Right. But yeah, now it'll be a close game. I mean, if you maybe yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to invent some reason or rationale to ever sit and watch this, but just don't. Tape some soap operas. Watch Dancing with the Stars with your wife for once on Saturday night and make her happy. I don't know. Think of the children.
Yeah, I just can't see it's pretty interesting because this past weekend we had really not a lot of interesting national matchups that were outside the SEC. And this week, we really just don't have any matchups at all.
Yeah, but again, four SEC teams are on bye this week. Over a third of the conference is on bye. We talked a lot about Tennessee, Alabama. We talked about that because that really is a pivotal game in the SEC championship race for both sides. Notably, with the we talked a little bit about Florida LSU, but with that game not being played, it also means if Alabama wins out and loses except for LSU, if their only losses to LSU, they will go to the SEC West game, even if it's LSU also runs the table, because a 7-1 Alabama will beat a 6-1 LSU with the loss being to LSU because they have a higher winning percentage.
It's
So if
crazy.
Alabama, yeah, it's really nuts. So if Alabama clears this hurdle, it almost, Auburn's looming, Mississippi State's looming. I get that, but it almost becomes a one-game season against A&M. And if they beat A&M, they are probably in the championship game because they can lose to LSU and it not matter at all, no matter what LSU does.
So I'm going to make another prediction here, and it's outside the SEC since Ohio State Wisconsin is kind of a big game, if you want to believe that. I think Ohio State kills Wisconsin because I don't think Wisconsin's very good. I know you think they're pretty good. I don't think Wisconsin's very good. I think Ohio State's going to try to make a point because Michigan's been making so many points this year. And I think they're going to beat them enough that they jump Alabama in the rankings because pollsters are so impressed with margin of victory right now, and I think Wisconsin's a little bit of a pretender at 11. So since we're talking about it, why don't you give me a score prediction on Ohio State Wisconsin, and you got to give me a score on Florida Missouri.
Oh, you're making it tough for me. Out of nowhere here. I don't know. I don't think I have a lot more faith in Wisconsin than you do. I think their defense is pretty good. I think Ohio State's very good, but I'm not really sold that Ohio State's, they ain't played nobody. And you
Right.
can rag that all you want, but it's true. Bowling Green, not very good. Now, Bowling Green's not just not very good. They beat them 77-10. Memphis beat Bowling Green 77-3. So
Right.
let's put that in perspective. Tulsa, really not very good. Oklahoma, starting to think they're not any good. Rutgers, well, Michigan just blew them out. Okay, well,
Right.
Indiana 38-17. Or that's the entire schedule. So
Right.
I don't know. I think Ohio State does win, but give me like 24-10, kind of
Yikes.
dull plod, pull
Big
away
Ten
late
football.
kind of. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's. I think it's going to be like a nothing season until Ohio State plays Michigan, and Missouri, Florida. I think 20-10
Okay.
Florida in a painful game that sort of
Okay.
ends late. And then I'll finish up with one final thing, and that's what we talked a couple weeks ago, right? When we did some national game discussion because all the SEC teams were playing their FCS paydays. And if you remember, what was my playoff contention? And it was Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Washington. And I called that before Washington beat Stanford and before Louisville beat Clemson. And I'm just saying, I am just saying that we're still on that track. And as I said at the time, well, I think I said Washington/Baylor, but yeah, I'm still gonna ride that gravy train. I
I
think that's where
still
we're
want
headed.
to. I'm still praying, just because I want to see the world burn. Two SEC teams getting into a playoff. It's not going to happen this year, but whatever football gods need to work out for that to happen, just so the rest of the football loving world can be 100% salty about it. It's got to happen. It would make my year. I just want to see it happen.
Yeah.
So, y'all, that's our show for this week. Thanks again so much for listening. We love doing this show. To tell you how much we love doing this show, Husky Pup still hasn't eaten dinner yet because we started taping late, and he hadn't even had a chance to because he wanted to get on and talk about some football. So week in and week out, we tell you thanks. We want to tell you please comment. We're having some great discussions in the comment threads. If you didn't get to check out any of our review shows, we talked about a few games from week 6 that were really great. So there's plenty of content there. Just give us feedback, any topics you want us to discuss, any things that you want to call us out on. We're here to listen. So thanks so much. Have a great week. God bless. See you later.